Great senator from Arkansas, Tom Cotton. How are you, sir?
Hey, Mark, I'm doing great. I hope you're doing well, too.
Well, I am. I'm doing well. No monuments have been pulled down on my watch here so far tonight. I can say that. Senator Cotton, D.C. wants to be a state. The Democrats seem to bring it up for exploitive purposes. They know it's not going anywhere. So let me just ask you, why shouldn't the District of Columbia be a state?
Because it's not a state, Mark. It is a city. And further than that, it is a federal city. It is our capital, and it was designed to be our capital by our founding fathers. They understood that the seat of our federal government, now the most powerful country in the world, needed to be under the control of federal authorities. Just 5 years before Madison wrote about this in the Federalist, there was a mutiny in Philadelphia where the Congress sat at the time, and the Philadelphia governor, or the Pennsylvania governor, refused to call out the militia to defend the Congress, which had to flee to New Jersey. Now, you may say that's obsolete, antiquated. We don't have any concerns about that. Look what just happened earlier this month, Mark.
All right.
We had riots on the street of Washington, D.C., and the reason those riots were put down was not because the mayor of D.C. called out the police in force. It was because Bill Barr and the president called out federal law enforcement and the National Guard to protect the institutions of our national government. That's why we have a federal city, and that's one of the main reasons why we should always have a federal city.
And you're exactly right. Mayor Bowser demonstrated exactly why we need a federal city with federal control, federal law enforcement, the federal military, and so forth. These are national monuments. These are national buildings. This is the heart of the United States government. And Tom Cotton, you mentioned Madison. Why would they have created the District of Columbia if they didn't intend for there to be a federal city? In other words, they could have plopped it down in Maryland or Virginia or anywhere else they wanted to, but they didn't do that, did they?
Yeah, and that is exactly what they wanted to avoid as well. The Congress had sat throughout most of the 1770s and 1780s in Philadelphia or in New York, and that made the seat of our national legislature subject to the choices of a local mayor and a state governor, as opposed to the control of the federal government itself. And again, we just saw this a few weeks ago, that the federal government needs to be able to protect its own institutions, literally in some cases protect its own terrain and its own buildings. Now, if you look, Mark, too, what the Democrats propose to do, they suggest that, well, we'll still have a federal core, a seat of the government around the Capitol, the White House, and the National Mall. That is a gerrymandered monstrosity, Mark. It's got 90 sides. Moreover, it would be totally dependent on this new Democratic-run state. It has one power plant. That means it would have to rely on for its power, its water, its sewage, its communications, and other critical infrastructure on this new small state of Washington that is controlled right now by a mayor who hates the president and has made it clear that she does not have the judgment or the courage to actually put down riots in the streets just a block from the White House.
And let's talk base politics here. We know full well if the governor was going to be a Republican or the senators were going to be Republican or the congressperson was going to be Republican, this wouldn't even be discussed, would it?
Yeah, of course not. If Washington, D.C. was overwhelmingly Republican, the Democrats in the House would never be proposing this. They are proposing it for one reason and one reason only, a naked power grab. They want to get 2 Democratic senators in perpetuity. Now, how do you know that, Mark? Well, it's very simple. If they really believed all their high-minded rhetoric about taxation without representation and how all these citizens in Washington, D.C. need to be represented in the Congress, there'd be a very simple solution from their point of view. They would simply retrocede the residential parts of Washington back to Maryland. That's exactly what happened in the 1840s when what we now call Arlington and Alexandria was retroceded back to Virginia. If they really wanted to compromise, if they really wanted to give those citizens representation in Congress, they would retrocede the residential parts back to Maryland. It would be almost perfectly sized to be a House district, so they'd get an extra seat in the House for Maryland, and they'd be represented by Maryland's 2 senators. But they don't want an extra seat in the House. They want 2 seats in perpetuity in the Senate because they're angry that the American people have not given them total control of the government for the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is this, from my perspective, you can't just pass a statute and change what was intended to be the District of Columbia. I read these things and I look at the rationale. This requires an amendment to the Constitution, as far as I'm concerned. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I think there are serious constitutional questions because remember, it's not just like admitting a territory which became a state. You know, all 37 states that weren't part of the original 13 were admitted by statutes. This is turning what is a federal city, what was contemplated by the original Constitution as a federal enclave for our national government, into a state. I think that presents a different question. But there's also another constitutional question, Mark. The 23rd Amendment gives 3 electoral votes in the Electoral College to, quote, the seat of government, not to Washington, D.C., but to the seat of government. So when the House Democrats bill passed, if it passed into law, there'd be 3 new seats for what is now the new state of Washington, but that small 90-sided federal zone would still be entitled to its 3 electoral votes. Guess what is the only residence in that small little rump federal district? The White House. So all Donald Trump and Melania Trump have to do is change their voter registration from Florida to Washington, D.C., and they control 3 electoral votes. I can't imagine that that's what Nancy Pelosi had in mind, but it just goes to show how absurd their bill is.
You know, I notice a lot of absurdities, Senator. They waste a lot of time on these show bills. They don't allow the Tim Scott bill to come up and so forth. And so they really just want issues. They really want to upset people, exploit situations. This Democrat Party is very different than the Democrat Party of 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's very radicalized, isn't it?
Yeah, of just 27 years ago, Mark, the last time that the House voted on a D.C. statehood bill, barely 100 Democrats voted for it. Today, more than 230 voted for it. But remember, there is a reason, Mark. There's a reason why they had this vote on Friday afternoon in the middle of the summer. It's because they don't want the American people to know what they're doing. This is massively unpopular. According to a Gallup poll from last year, more than 2/3 of Americans oppose statehood for the District of Columbia for all of the very sensible reasons we've discussed. So they held this vote not on, say, Tuesday afternoon where it could be scrutinized by the news on Wednesday. They buried it in like a Friday afternoon bad news dump because they know just how unpopular it is. However, I would suggest that this is just a foretaste of what the nation will get if Joe Biden wins the White House and the Democrats win the Senate and the House. D.C. statehood, Puerto Rican statehood, packing the Supreme Court, eliminating the Electoral College. The Democrats want to rig the rules of our democracy so they can hold power permanently.
And yet, at least early summer, this doesn't seem to resonate with parts of our country where you think it might. In other words, some Republicans, if you're listening to TV, which is a very dangerous thing, and you're watching some of these polls, it's like, you know, Trump's responsible for all the tumult, when he's responsible really for none of it. You know, the mayors and the governors and the pandemic and the Democrats running wild with impeachment and all the rest of it. Are they going to be able to tag the president with their own conduct?
Look, the president's going to be able to say to the American people, our economy got knocked on its back by this coronavirus. It happened all around the world. But before then, we built the strongest economy our nation has seen in decades. Who do you want to rebuild it? Me or the guy that with Barack Obama led to sluggish, slow job growth and a weak economy for 8 years? And by the way, who do you want to defend your life, your livelihood, and our heritage in the streets? Me or Joe Biden? Joe Biden hasn't said a word about people tearing down statues of George Washington and U.S. Grant. Donald Trump, obviously, is going to stand up to mob rule in our streets. So those are ultimately going to be the issues on which this campaign is decided.
It is amazing how Biden's getting away with being the bubble guy, you know? It's amazing to me. They're even talking about they're going to have a virtual convention. Do you know why they're going to have a virtual convention? Because they have a lot of kook delegates, you know, a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters and so forth. And they don't want the American people to know just how radical this party has become. And let me suggest this to you, Senator. A lot of these people in the streets, both the mostly peaceful and the mostly not peaceful, those are Bernie Sanders supporters. And they have moved over and are moving over to Biden to stop Trump. The 2 co-founders, or 2 of them, of Black Lives Matter, who admit to be Marxists, they basically said our goal is to get Trump out of office. And the Democrat Party is not responsible for anything.
And it's the goal of the Democratic Party as a whole. It's the goal of their media wing as well. I won't be surprised if Joe Biden never emerges from his basement. They think they're winning right now, so why would you put a gas machine like Joe Biden out on the campaign trail? I won't be surprised if Joe Biden refuses to debate Donald Trump, because, again, they know that Joe Biden has been nothing but a weather vane for Democratic fads for 50 years. And the latest fad, as you say, is the Marxism and the mob rule that we see in our streets today. There's no way that a President Joe Biden would ever stand up to the radical left wing of his party any more than he stood up to them when he voted for most favored nation status for China, or he voted for terrible trade deals, or he voted for open borders. Joe Biden is going to do what the Democratic Party wants him to do, and the Democratic Party right now is increasingly run by radical left-wingers.
Here's two fears I have, among many, but two right now. They'll say, yeah, we'll debate, but Joe's going to do it from the basement. They don't want him man-to-man on a stage, standing behind, and talking back and forth with Trump. They want to be able to manage it. So they're not going to want them on the stage together. That's number one. And here's a second serious concern I have. And I've been somewhat concerned about voicing it, but I don't think I'm giving the radicals any ideas. You remember what happened in Philadelphia some time back with the Black Panthers and how they threatened the voters in that particular precinct? Do you remember that story? Do you remember that investigation that took place? I am worried, and not the Black Panthers, but all these radicals, whether it's Antifa or Black Lives Matter, I'm concerned about Election Day, what may take place in some of these precincts. And I hope the Attorney General and I hope the state secretaries of state are paying attention to this. I don't know what the answer is, but I don't put anything past these Marxist anarchists, Senator.
Yeah, I mean, all you have to do is look at what some of these anarchist, insurrectionist rioters have done over the last month on our streets in terms of torching churches or looting department stores, tearing down statues of George Washington, Andrew Jackson, U.S. Grant, tearing down statues of abolitionists or defacing statues of African-American regiments that fought for the Union on the side of freedom in the Civil War. I don't think you can put anything out of question when you're dealing with anarchists and insurrectionists like we've seen over the last month.
Well, Senator, I want to thank you. Have a good weekend and good luck to you. Be safe.
Thank you, Mark.
All right. God bless.